That bridge wasn't just wood. It was mornings with coffee, evenings with clarity, and my only reminder that life after divorce could still be beautiful. I'd spent 12 Saturdays building it, pressure-treated lumber, hand-finished railings, a gentle arch that let sunlight shimmer beneath. Nothing fancy, just mine. Then the HOA sent bulldozers. No warning, no courtesy notice. Just a demolition crew and the tight-lipped smile of Ms. Deborah Lancaster, the self-crowned president of the Willowcrest Lakes Homeowners Association. She stood on her grandiose cedar deck, arms folded, watching my bridge get torn to shreds, like she was supervising a landscaping adjustment. The sound of snapping wood hit harder than I thought it would. When the last beam floated into the lake, she turned toward me, sipped from her wineglass, and said, "Unauthorized structures compromise." Uniform aesthetics, I wanted to scream. Instead, I just walked back to my house. Every step felt heavier than the last. 6 months earlier, I'd moved into my small lakefront home. Not for luxury, but for quiet. After 20 years of working in hydrology and infrastructure planning, and one messy divorce that left me emotionally bankrupt, I just wanted peace. Something to build with my hands. Something that wasn't going to collapse beneath me like everything else had. The lake behind my yard seemed perfect. A man-made reservoir, Lake Marion, surrounded by overly manicured lawns, white fences, and homeowners who took themselves too seriously. I didn't care. I had no plans to join the social committee or attend wine tastings. I wanted a dock, a chair, a view of the sunrise. That's it. So I built a bridge, not even a full dock, just a small arched walkway from my yard to a floating wooden platform, sturdy enough to sit on, fish from, or lie back on with a drink. No music, no parties, no tiki torches. But in Willowcrest. Lakes, apparently peace violates protocol. The first time I heard about the HOA rules was when I found a typed notice rolled into my mailbox, bound with twine. Reminder: any structural additions, even temporary, must be approved by the Architectural Review Board. Fair enough, except that board was just Deborah and her wine club besties, I wrote back. Polite, detailed, even included diagrams. Offered to present the bridge specs if needed. I even mentioned my background as a certified structural engineer. No response. Then came the fine, $1,200 for unauthorized construction. It was printed on pink paper and signed in the biggest, loopiest cursive I'd ever seen. I appealed. They scheduled a hearing, then canceled it the day before. I offered to shorten the bridge. Crickets. I stopped getting letters, so I assumed we were done. Then, the backhoe showed up. When I stepped outside that morning, I didn't even recognize the sound at first. Just the low rumble of a machine, and then, crack. I ran down the yard and froze. The demolition team was mid-job. 2 men in orange vests were tossing beams into the back of a truck. One guy held a crowbar and gave me an awkward half-wave. "Just following work orders, sir." I didn't say a word. I couldn't. Deborah stood above it all like a queen surveying her moat. "It was an eyesore," she called out to me. "You're welcome. You're welcome." My fists clenched so hard I felt my nails dig into my palms. But I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I turned around, walked to the garage, and sat on the floor among the leftover lumber from the bridge. For 20 minutes, I stared at the grain of the planks I had sanded myself, the screws I'd catalogued, the plans I had drawn. Something inside me, something essential, cracked. That night, I couldn't sleep. Instead, I walked down to the lake with a flashlight. Bits of my bridge still floated there, bobbing like corpses. I waded in, knee-deep in water, and retrieved what I could: broken slats, busted posts, mangled bolts. I dragged the pieces up onto my lawn, laid them out on the grass, and started hammering. By sunrise, I had built a sign: rough, ugly, raw. This was mine. I dug a hole where the bridge had once begun and planted the sign firmly in the dirt. Later that morning, as I sipped burnt coffee from my chipped mug, I saw her, Deborah, standing on her deck again, watching. I waved this time, not kindly, not mockingly, just a wave, like, you started this, I won't forget. By noon, my neighbor Curtis stopped by, retired Navy, quiet guy with a dog named Bucket. He pointed at the sign and said, "Good." I raised an eyebrow. "She fined me $500 for having an American flag hanging sideways during roof repairs," he added. Said it violated symmetry. Then came Martha, sprightly 70-year-old, drives a golf cart with bumper stickers that say "Try that" in a small town. She handed me lemonade and said, "They called my garden invasive, so I planted more." They weren't just neighbors, they were witnesses, survivors of Deborah's reign. I wasn't alone. That evening I sat by the lake with a flashlight and my old engineering sketch pad. I stared at the shoreline. I thought about the dam, the sediment levels, the spillways, the piping. I remembered reading in the neighborhood welcome packet that the lake was built in the 80s by a now-defunct developer. Managed by the HOA, maintained poorly. The gears turned. If they wanted war, I'd give them a flood. Not of lawsuits or letters, but water. Too much, or too little. Because the thing about a man-made lake, if you understand how it was built, you also know how to unbuild it. I'm not usually a revenge guy. I'm a schematics guy, a measurements guy. The kind of guy who can read a contour map like it's a love letter and knows the flow rate of stormwater runoff in cubic feet per second. But when Deborah destroyed my bridge, she didn't just piss off a quiet homeowner. She activated a man with blueprints, a grudge, and access to bolt cutters. So I started drawing. The first thing I needed was information. Real, structural, historical information about Lake Marion. So I did what any seasoned hydrologist would do when planning an act of glorious civil disobedience. I went to the county archives. 2 hours, 1 vending machine burrito, and 3 sarcastic remarks from the clerk later. I had what I needed. Original construction records for the Willowcrest Reservoir System. A 1987 plan set stamped Marion Basin Development Project, Dixon Engineering Group. My heart skipped when I saw the name. Dixon. That's the same last name as Deborah, because of course it is. According to the records, the lake was fed by a series of underground springs and rainfall collection zones. Water levels were regulated by a concrete spillway system buried under the east side embankment, about a 10-minute walk from my backyard. The lake wasn't natural. It was built, controlled, and anything built could be unbuilt. I spent that night sketching possibilities. Not reckless destruction, just adjustments, controlled exposure. I wasn't planning to empty the lake like Moses parting the Red Sea. Not yet. I just wanted Deborah to know there are consequences for swinging a wrecking ball at someone's sanctuary, especially when that someone is an engineer with nothing left to lose. The next morning, Matt Cooper stopped by. His hair was windblown, and he was carrying a socket wrench, like it was a baton in a relay race. "She fined me again," he said. $800. For what? Apparently my curtain colors aren't approved under the Seasonal Tone Harmony Directive. I blinked. That's not a real thing. He pulled out a folded letter and pointed. "It is now." I handed him coffee, showed him my sketches, and said, "You ever wonder what happens if we don't maintain the water level?" He grinned like he'd been waiting his whole life to hear that question. Step 1 was reconnaissance. Under the cover of dusk, we made our way around the lake's perimeter to the spillway access structure. Most residents didn't know it existed. It looked like an overgrown shed near a patch of cattails, half buried under ivy and HOA neglect. The padlock was old, rusty, criminally unmaintained. Matt handed me the bolt cutters with a dramatic bow. "After you, engineer of chaos." The lock popped like a soda can, Inside was a manual gate mechanism, crank wheel style, mounted to a spillway pipe designed to slowly release overflow downstream. There were no cameras, no sensors, no electronic fail-safes. This entire multi-million-dollar lakefront community was protected by a rusted wheel and the misplaced faith of HOA arrogance. I didn't drain the lake that night. I just smiled, locked it back up and said, "Let's give Deborah a reason to squint from her deck." The next 48 hours were all about planning. We built a distraction strategy that was equal parts mechanical theater and HOA satire. Matt would fake a mechanical emergency with his old fishing boat, complete with black smoke from a rigged oil funnel, loud hammering, and just enough shouting to lure Deborah's attention across the lake. While she peered through her binoculars trying to figure out what was on fire, I'd quietly return to the spillway and open the gate a few inches. Not enough to cause panic, just enough to say, "This lake isn't yours." Wednesday evening, Operation Trickle Down Justice was go. The sun had just started dipping behind the trees when Matt started his performance. Smoke puffed from the stern of his boat as he slapped a wrench loudly against the hull and bellowed, "I told you not to cross the streams, Carl!" Carl didn't exist, but it was a nice touch. I was crouched in the reeds, watching through binoculars, as Deborah stepped onto her massive deck, frowning and peering through her opera glasses like a low-budget Bond villain. That was my cue. I slipped along the shore, reached the spillway, opened the panel, and gave the crank a careful turn. Water began to flow. Not a gush, a quiet, steady stream heading downstream through a reinforced channel that hadn't been used in decades. I locked the gate exactly where I wanted it. 6 inches of drop overnight, enough to expose the first sediment layer. Enough to make Deborah's perfectly manicured lakefront less resort and spa and more sad pond energy. The next morning, I sat on my back porch with fresh coffee and a grin. The lake had dropped just enough that the waterline kissed the roots of the decorative shrubs along Deborah's seawall. Mud patches peeked out near the community dock. The deco water, usually glassy and reflective, looked disturbed, unsettled. By noon, HOA residents were posting on the community forum. "Anyone else notice weird changes in the lake level? There's a smell near lot 12. Is that fuel? Our kids' floaties are grounded. HOA, please advise." Then came the official email. Subject: Natural water variations. "Dear residents, temporary fluctuations in lake levels are completely normal this time of year. There is no cause for concern. Sincerely, Willowcrest HOA Board." Translation: Deborah has no idea what's happening, but doesn't want to look weak. Perfect. That night, I got an anonymous envelope under my door. No return address, no note. Just a photo of the lake taken from an aerial drone, and a yellow post-it that said, "Whatever you're doing, keep going. We're with you." Clever, risky, and motivating as hell. By day 3, the lake had dropped nearly a foot. That's when the real secret started to show. Oily sheens on the surface, dark patches of sediment, something metallic poking. Through the shallows near Lot 9, people started whispering. Deborah started pacing, and I started thinking. This wasn't just about my bridge anymore. This was about exposing the whole damn system. You don't sabotage a lake in broad daylight unless you know what's buried beneath it. And I needed to know everything, because I had a hunch. One of those slow, gut-deep feelings that doesn't go away. The kind you get when something smells wrong long before it looks wrong. This lake? It wasn't just artificial. It was hiding something. The oily surface, the chemical odor, the weird discoloration in the newly exposed shorelines. They weren't just ugly. They were suspicious. So I did what engineers do best. I researched, I planned, I hunted for proof. Step 1. Maps. I returned to the county planning office, this time asking for historical development records, everything tied to Willowcrest Lakes and Marion Basin. It took a bribe in the form of donuts and charm, but after an hour, The clerk brought out a box labeled Inactive Zoning, 1985-1990. Inside were blueprints, land surveys, and, jackpot, environmental impact assessments. The original files showed that Lake Marion was constructed over a lowland basin previously designated as a Class B risk zone due to proximity to historical industrial waste. Turns out, back in the 1970s, there was a small chemical plant 2 miles upstream that dumped byproducts into a tributary later rerouted to form this lake. The water looked clean, but the sediment? That's another story, more disturbing. A 1991 note from a junior inspector marked Unconfirmed Contamination Concerns. Refer to HOA board for follow-up. And whose name was listed on the newly formed HOA board in 1991? Harold Dixon, Deborah's grandfather. I took the files home and laid them across my living room floor. Diagrams, faded memos, and test results lined up like clues in a detective novel. I wasn't dealing with simple HOA pettiness anymore. I was looking at generational corruption. My destroyed bridge had just been a trigger. The real story was a decades-long cover-up hiding beneath thousands of gallons of lake water. That night, I got a knock at the door. It was Clara Rhodes. 76. Walker with tennis balls, lived 3 doors down. Known for gossip, lemon bars, and not much else, until now. She looked both nervous and determined. "I heard you've been poking around," she said. I nodded. Clara glanced over her shoulder. "Come to my garage, I have something." Her garage was musty, filled with old furniture and the kind of plastic bins you only open when someone dies. She pulled out a box labeled Len's Board Docs, Private, Len Rhodes, her husband, former HOA treasurer. Dead 10 years. Inside were handwritten meeting notes, photocopies of incident reports, and a thick folder titled Marion Lake, Not for Distribution. My pulse kicked. Clara handed it to me without ceremony. Len always said the lake was built dirty. He tried to raise the alarm in '94 but got voted down by Harold Dixon and his cronies. After that, he started documenting everything. I flipped open the folder. The first page? Memo. Sediment sample. Elevated ammonia. Plus. Benzene. Do not share with residents. Unnecessary panic may affect property values. Another one. Maintain high water levels to mask visual indicators during dry months. There it was. The smoking gun, or rather, the buried barrel. I thanked Clara and scanned everything that night. Then I started drafting an email, not to Deborah, not to the HOA, but to every resident in the neighborhood. Subject line: What else is the HOA hiding beneath Lake Marion? Body: You've seen the water level dropping. You've noticed the smell. But did you know the original developers knew about toxic sediment before the lake was even filled? Did you know our HOA has actively concealed environmental concerns for over 30 years? Ask yourself, why were repairs to the dam delayed for decades? Why are there no recent sediment reports? Why did Harold Dixon, and now Deborah Lancaster, refuse outside inspection? Attached are county documents, environmental records, and internal HOA memos never shared with residents. You deserve to know what's under the surface, literally. I attached 6 scanned pages and hit Send to All. Within 2 hours, my inbox was on fire. Supportive replies from longtime residents, outraged questions, and, most satisfyingly, silence from Deborah. But that silence broke the next morning. A black luxury SUV rolled up to my driveway. Deborah stepped out. No clipboard this time, just fury bottled in a designer pantsuit. She didn't walk. She stalked. "You've gone too far," she hissed, publicly accusing the HOA of environmental fraud. I didn't flinch. Did I say anything that wasn't true? Her eyes narrowed. "You don't understand what's at stake here. People's equity, their security. Do you know how much property value is tied to this lake?" I crossed my arms. "Do you know how much benzene it takes to cause leukemia?" She froze. That landed. "This isn't just about your little bridge anymore," she said, her voice trembling. "You're trying to destroy everything." "No," I replied. "You already did that. I'm just turning on the lights." By afternoon, her counterattack had begun. Residents received a dramatic email titled, "Defending Willowcrest, a message from your HOA president." It accused an unnamed individual of spreading misinformation, sabotaging the community, and jeopardizing our lifestyle for personal vendettas. But something had changed. People weren't buying it, because now they had documents, now they had questions, and now they had each other. That night, I walked the lake again. Mud flats were visible along the edges, and in those flats, debris. Bottles, metal chunks, a piece of rebar. A kid standing with his dad near Dock 7 shouted, "What's that smell, Daddy?" His father didn't answer. The truth was surfacing, and Deborah, she was sinking. I knew the moment things shifted, not from an email, not from a HOA bulletin, but from the silence, the kind that falls when people finally stop pretending. At 7:03 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, I stood barefoot at the edge of my yard, coffee in hand, watching as the lake dipped below another threshold. The waterline was now so low that the tips of rebar and shattered cement jutted out along the shore like bones surfacing after a flood. But that wasn't the moment that told me Deborah was losing her grip. It was the joggers, 3 of them, regulars, always jogged past my house with earbuds in and eyes averted. That morning, all 3 slowed their pace. One stopped completely, staring at the shoreline. "I don't remember that being there," he muttered, pointing at a rust-stained pipe poking from the waterline. I didn't say anything. Didn't have to. That afternoon, Mrs. Patterson, soft-spoken, widowed, known for planting daisies and avoiding conflict, knocked on my door. "I called the environmental office," she said without preamble. "Reported the smell, the watercolor. The kids aren't swimming anymore." I blinked. She looked me straight in the eyes. "My husband always said that lake wasn't right. I told him not to make waves. Now I think we all should have made a few more." She turned to leave, then paused. "Don't stop, Zane. A lot of us are scared, but more of us are finally angry." That was the pulse shift, from silence to whispers. 2 days later, those whispers turned into something louder. Group of neighbors, 6 families, stood in front of the HOA community board, snapping photos of the posted water quality chart. One woman read it aloud. Test date, July 8th. Result, normal. Notes, no unusual findings. Funny, someone muttered. The lake dropped 12 inches that week. Smelled like motor oil. But sure, no unusual findings. Matt Cooper arrived mid-conversation and added fuel to the fire. "My dog got a rash after swimming," he said, holding up a vet report. Someone gasped. Another man said, "We need a second opinion." And that's when Clara Rhodes showed up like a thunderclap in orthopedic shoes. She held up the manila envelope of documents her husband had saved and calmly said, "There's more. The HOA's been hiding this for 30 years. You could hear Deborah's perfect lawn dying from the stress." Deborah struck back the only way she knew how, with theater. That evening, every resident received an emergency HOA notification titled, "Livestream, Emergency Community Address, 8 p.m. tonight. Your board president will address the harmful misinformation, explain current lake maintenance operations, and present a plan to protect our homes and property values." The wording was stiff. The panic was real. At 7:59 p.m., the stream began. Deborah appeared in full political crisis mode, navy blazer, conservative pearl necklace, hair pulled back like she was about to read the community bedtime stories about unity and order. But her voice trembled, her eyes darted, her smile was brittle. "For decades," she began, "Willowcrest has represented not just luxury, but standards. We are proud of our community's reputation, our lifestyle, and our shared values. Unfortunately, a recent campaign of sabotage and misinformation has endangered all of that. She went on to blame environmental radicals, unvetted online rumors, and a disgruntled homeowner seeking revenge. She never named me, but she didn't need to. The camera didn't zoom in on her deck railing, now clearly stained by water retraction. It didn't show the dead grass, the foul-smelling sludge in her flower beds. The evidence was too widespread for a speech to erase. Then came the comment section. It started slow. What about the smell? Why is the lake still dropping? Didn't this start after a resident asked for transparency? And then Mrs. Patterson struck again. I've lived here for 15 years. My husband reported strange odors in 2012. We were told to stop spreading rumors. That was long before Zane built his bridge. Boom. Truth bomb. More comments followed. Anecdotes, photos, documents, reports from old neighborhood meetings. Deborah's feed turned into a live fact-checking trial. By 8:23 p.m., she was visibly rattled, accusing certain individuals of undermining community cohesion. By 8:30, she abruptly ended the stream. The next morning, a white van with government plates pulled into the HOA lot. Two environmental engineers stepped out. Clipboards, hard hats, measurement gear. One of them looked at the exposed sediment and muttered, "We're going to need more samples." By 10 a.m., yellow hazard tape was up near the east spillway. By noon, news vans arrived, KXRT9 parked just outside the gates, a reporter standing in front of the visibly receding waterline. Willowcrest, once considered a luxury lake community, now faces questions about decades of environmental secrecy. Sources say homeowners may have been living atop an unreported hazard site for years. The reporter didn't have to say it, but everyone watching knew. The storm had arrived. Deborah's mansion, once the heart of the neighborhood, now looked like a haunted dollhouse overlooking a drying swamp. Her wine deck was unusable. Her patio furniture had been moved back from the encroaching sludge. By sunset, someone had hung a hand-painted sign at the HOA office. "This was yours. The rest is ours now." I didn't paint it, but I wish I had. That evening, a group of residents gathered in Matt's backyard, not for protest, not for confrontation, but to talk. No HOA agenda. No manicured speeches. Just tired, angry, smart people comparing notes, coordinating responses, and forming an action group to demand full third-party testing and financial audits of the HOA. Clara sat at the head of the table. Matt handed me a beer and whispered, "You realize you broke the dam, right?" "I didn't break it," I said. "I just lowered the water. Everything underneath was already cracked." I used to think peace was about quiet. A calm lake, a small bridge, coffee at sunrise. But standing at the edge of Lake Marion now, watching the muddy basin crack under the weight of truth, I realize peace isn't the absence of noise. It's the absence of lies. And Deborah Lancaster had built an entire empire on them. It began with signs of decay, literal ones. The lake had dropped over 2 feet since I started turning that rusty wheel at the spillway, enough to reveal patches of oily sediment and buried construction debris from 3 decades ago. Residents were no longer just whispering about the smell. They were documenting it. Clara Rhodes had become an unexpected hero, sharing more documents from her late husband's private files, memos with phrases like "suppress sediment visibility" and "maintain illusion of water integrity." Even the HOA's own archived emails, leaked anonymously to residents, were damning. One particularly telling one from 2016 read, "Keep the water level high during inspection week. No need to provoke questions. Appearance, stability." They weren't maintaining the lake. They were concealing a time bomb. Then the state stepped in. After weeks of neighbor complaints, aerial drone footage, and media coverage, the Department of Environmental Protection issued an emergency order. Immediate investigation into potential groundwater contamination. Within 48 hours, a full crew arrived. Trucks, hazmat teams, portable testing labs. Residents gathered along the shoreline, watching as government officials in reflective gear waded into their backyard paradise with soil probes and contamination scanners. A week later, the initial report dropped, and it landed like a meteor. Lake Marion sediment contains unsafe levels of benzene, arsenic, and industrial solvents exceeding EPA thresholds. Suspected source: historical dumping, buried chemical residue, and improper maintenance. Status: environmental remediation required. Community declared high-risk zone pending cleanup. In one sentence, everything Deborah had spent her life protecting, the home values, the image, the prestige, evaporated, and that was before the insurance companies got involved. Within days, home insurers froze policies. Mortgages were halted. Title transfers blocked. The lakefront properties, once appraised at $5 million or more, were now uninsurable environmental liabilities. Deborah went silent. The woman who once sent 5-page letters about unauthorized flower beds suddenly had nothing to say. But the silence didn't last. Her final act was her most desperate. 3 days before the grand jury announcement. A motion. Sensor camera near the spillway caught footage of a shadowy figure at 3:12 a.m., wearing all black, carrying a sledgehammer. She tried to break the manual gate, the same one I'd used weeks earlier, hoping perhaps to flood the lake again and wash away the visible damage. But it was too late. And unfortunately for her, Matt was out walking. His dog, he called 911. Police arrived within minutes, and Deborah Lancaster, former queen of HOA regulation, was arrested while screaming that she was saving the lake. The only thing she saved was the final nail in her legal coffin. When the news broke, the fallout was swift. Federal charges for environmental cover-up and obstruction civil suits from over 60 residents, personal liability estimates exceeding $5.3 million. HOA board members resigning en masse, one citing irreparable legal exposure, and the biggest blow: the neighborhood's pristine, perfect lake was now officially a hazard zone. But for the first time in years, it was also honest. 6 months later, I stood in the same spot where my original bridge had once reached out over calm water. There was no lake now, just a basin under reconstruction, a team of environmental engineers working day and night to remove contaminated sediment and reinforce the dam. And in the middle of it all, my new bridge. Smaller, simpler, but still mine. Matty stood beside me, sipping a soda, watching a drone fly overhead. "You ever think it'd end like this?" he asked. I smiled. "I thought it would end in another fine, maybe a dead plant citation." We laughed. Clara arrived a few minutes later with oatmeal cookies and a worn manila folder she now called her legacy binder. None of us talked about Deborah. We didn't need to. The community she ruled by fear now rebuilt itself with cooperation. And then something strange happened. I got a letter, forwarded from another state. An HOA in Oregon, facing similar problems: toxic sediment, power-hungry board members. They'd read about Willowcrest in the national news. The letter ended with, "Your courage gave us the blueprint we needed. Thank you for showing us that even buried truths can resurface, if someone's brave enough to open the floodgates." I never wanted to be a whistleblower. I just wanted to build a bridge. But sometimes, bridges aren't for crossing. Sometimes, they're for connecting people who finally realize they deserve better. If this story hit you like a wrecking ball through HOA corruption, hit that like button. Drop your own wild HOA revenge stories in the comments, and subscribe to AS Stories for more outrageous tales of justice, sabotage, and sweet, sweet payback. Because in this neighborhood, revenge builds character, and sometimes it even drains lakes. See you in the next story.